Okay,
Good.
now Jody,
Okay.
anytime.
Okay. Anyway, welcome, Jessica. We're so happy to have you. This will be a treat, I'm sure. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about Jessica, and I don't know if anybody looked her up on the internet and also TED Talks. You've done a number of TED Talks, which are great.
Just
Or
one.
one. Oh, the one about light and landscape? Is that what it's called?
Oh, that was at a show. That was at an
Oh,
opening.
sorry, your sound went down.
Oh, that was at a reception for a
I
show.
can't hear
Had me
you.
talk. Can
Okay, we
anybody
can
else hear
hear
me?
you, Jody.
Can you hear me?
Can people hear me?
Yes. Well,
Well, I
Can
you're
you hear
you're a
can't
little
me?
bit faint.
I am,
No,
hear.
Jody can't hear you at all.
Oh,
but you can hear me, Nancy.
I
yes,
can
now
hear
I
you fine,
can.
Jessica.
Oh, okay. Good.
Okay, now I can.
Okay. The Light and
Okay.
Landscape was a show I did, an exhibit I did, and they had me do
Oh,
a talk.
oh,
So not a TED Talk.
oh. But you didn't do a TED Talk?
I did do a TED Talk.
Yeah, and what was that on? I thought I saw you on TED
It was,
Talk.
I think it was called Art and Nature, and it was my national parks experiences, basically,
Oh,
from
okay.
a very nervous
Oh,
neurotic point of view because you had to memorize the whole thing and presented it
oh,
in a very dense 13 minutes. And I had not ever had to memorize 13 minutes of
oh.
content before.
That's,
So if you
oh, I did.
watch it, it's kind of cringy for me to watch because I don't look natural at all. I look like I just want to disappear.
I know what that's like.
The content's good, the presentation's not so
Uh,
good.
well, you're probably hard on yourself, but
Oh, for sure.
now we're all going to watch it, of course.
Great. All right. I put it up publicly. I didn't have to do that.
Yeah, just forget about it. Okay,
Yeah.
well, Jessica had a wonderful background. Her mom was a piano teacher. Her dad went to the Kansas City Art Institute. She attended University of Minnesota. In the, I don't know whether it was your parents' influence, but they were both into art and music. But it didn't seem like a good career choice to you, right? And you loved astronomy too. But you took all the drawing classes you could in university, so that gave you your foundation. So you kept in your love of art, and but then you earned a degree in American Studies, which must have covered a lot of geography, history. I don't know what else.
Culture, everything. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is cool. And then that had the huge influence on her work. And then she moved to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho in 2000 and established a family and started making art. Then her husband got moved to for his work to Palo Alto, California, and for 2 years, uh, uh, that's when I guess didn't know anybody in your new city, so you took a watercolor class. And even though she won a big award for watercolor in high school for a painting you didn't like watercolor then.
No.
So then, but then this class left an impression on you, and you decided to make a career around it. So that must have been one heck of a
Yeah.
teacher you had, or something, or just
It was largely a product of having an infant and a toddler. And
yes,
my husband had a great job, but he was gone all the time, and I knew nobody. So after a
yeah,
year of kind of losing yourself into the
yes.
caretaking of little kids, it was just a chance to do something that was mine. And
So
I think
when did
that's really why I latched into it. And it's intellectual. You paint with watercolor.
yes,
That can be such an intellectual endeavor. It was the thing that was missing. So yeah, I went a little crazy and oh, third class, I could do this. This is a new career. And I really didn't know what I was doing yet, but
yeah, you dove right
worked
in.
out. It worked out.
But you must have painted when the kids went to sleep. Did you have
Yep.
energy? Who has energy for that after all day with a toddler?
I had motivation and
Right.
frustration with the world. So
That's true. That's true. Okay, so then let's see. Uh, and I guess your grandparents had a farm. You spent a lot of time in the landscape there, wandering, and like you said, you started taking photographs early at age 6. You got your first camera, and you've been photographing ever since. And then, when on a family vacation, she discovered the artist in residence program at the national parks. So you completed 8 national parks residences, and like so over 300
wow.
days in national parks. In one for the national park or the Bureau of Land Management. So, and also artist in residence for the Idaho Conservation League. So I guess that's your landscape painter. So living and working in the national park doesn't get much better than that for
It's kind
landscape,
of a
I
dream.
suppose.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and the rest of your biography goes on and on and on about all your galleries and shows and all the societies you belong to, which I listed in our introduction letter that we sent out inviting people on Zoom. So, I don't know how you keep up with all those societies, but good for you.
Largely it comes from self-doubt and
Oh,
lack of confidence. And it's a way to get outside reassurance that you're okay and you're good enough. So it's
yeah.
not like it's something everybody needs to do. It's
Oh, and that's why you started
for me, it's been that
entering
was a big
shows.
part of it. Yeah, is to find out how if I was doing well enough to stand up, to peers. And then it became okay, well, I guess if I got in there, this many times, I must not be terrible. The
Well,
things we do to ourselves.
yeah. Well, you have a lot of shows and a lot of awards and a lot of different groups you belong to. So we're excited to hear you tell us about it and show us what you do. So I'll paint it over. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm gonna move you straight down to a tabletop view. Hopefully, there we go.
Oh,
Computer.
hold on one second.
Okay. So I like to start out with just kind of overview of the way I think about watercolor, just so we're kind of on the same page. And sometimes I've had a lot of students who just have never even heard some of these things. So even though I assume you're probably all, pretty familiar with painting, I think it's helpful to think about what watercolor actually is and what it does. And so the most simple thing that I like to explain is if you look at your piece of paper from the side, if that's a side view of your piece of paper, every time you make a brush stroke, you're basically making a long bubble that has bits of pigment suspended in it, right? And just understanding that and some basic physics explains all the things watercolor does that seem unpredictable, uncontrollable, all of that. So if I have a brush stroke I put down like that, and then next to it I put a brush stroke down that's a lot wetter, and let's say I was changing color or changing value and I wanted to see my first color, my second color, a nice blend in between. Well, if this is happening, gravity is going to push all of this over and you're going to end up with a bubble kind of halfway in between and all the pigments are going to mix together, right? So when you're trying to do like a gradient wash or a color shift, what you're looking for is a consistent amount of water, whether you're changing color or changing value, so that all those little bits of pigment, they will mix in the overlap area and kind of settle out, but stay separated in between. So you get these little areas of a smooth mix and then areas in between where you can see what the change was. So often the things that we're doing is just a matter of fine tuning how much water is going down. And I like to control that with a kitchen sponge, wet and wrung out. This is just a cellulose sponge, not a natural sponge. Those don't seem as absorbent. And I like this way better than paper towel because paper towel, when it's dry, sucks so much water off your brush. And when it's wet, it doesn't suck the same amount of water off your brush, so it's harder to control. This is a controllable variable. I can get a sponge wet, wring it out, and every single time I paint, I can saturate a brush. I know how much water is on that because it's fully saturated. And every time I touch it down to my sponge, I'm taking a little bit off. So I could just take the drips off, or I could hold it down for a nice while and get it dried out enough to do, some kind of dry brush technique or something if I wanted to. But with time, when you use the same limited number of brushes for at least a little while, you get a pretty good idea of how that brush works and what's on your brush for water or paint. Or if you make a big puddle, you don't need to bring all of that to your paper. You can dab some off on your sponge. And as long as I'm using a large sponge, I have never had the paint transfer back onto the brush, like a different color that's soaked in to the sponge never transfers back onto my brush, which is wonderful. This can get really dirty until it's saturated. It'll keep taking water at about the same rate. So it's a really nice controllable setup to know what you're bringing onto your paper so that you have an easier time of getting what you want. And the other thing to remember is as we have that, that bubble with the pigment in it, think of it as this is until that water evaporates out, those pigments are moving around with each other. This is fluid. They're moving around like, bits in a snow globe, and they're active and will settle out in usually really beautiful ways if it's a granulating pigment. If you work really dry and you have these very, very low puddles, those pigments won't mix in quite the same way. So sometimes this is not my forte, but I know some artists are really particular with how they combine which pigments because of the way they will settle out. Because some pigments will be heavier than others. And so if you work a little bit more fluidly, when you have like 2 or 3 pigments that all have different weights to the little tiny, microscopic pieces of pigment, the way they settle out is different. So you'll get these really beautiful things that happen on the paper, the way those pigments settle in layers. You're not going to get that if you paint really dry, and you won't get it the same if you use a hairdryer, which doesn't mean there's anything wrong with a hairdryer or painting really dry. It's just a difference in what the pigments will do. And so, to me, there's no one right or wrong way to use any medium. It's a medium. We're in art. We get to do whatever we want to do, however we want to do it. But it's helpful to understand the capacity of the medium and what your, tools and options and possibilities are. And if you grasp just this much, if you can figure out what you're trying to do and articulate that for yourself, if you understand how the material works, you can figure out how to get there. People are smart, creative problem solvers. We figure things out, we invent tools, we reinvent the same tools somebody else already invented. You will find your way to get there if you take the time to think about what is it I'm actually trying to do, and was I using the materials in a way that will get me there, or is there a different way that might get me there more successfully? So I like to start there, just so we're kind of on the same page with that. And I hope it's not an insult to anybody, but just real quick, when I talk about value, it's how light and dark things are. Value is such a key thing in art, just because every color, everything we see has a value to it. And when we're young and we're learning about the world, as toddlers, the toys they give us, one of the things that we're asked to do is to sort things by color, but nobody ever teaches us to sort by value. And so we grow up thinking of color, and really we're combining color and value. And so until you can kind of separate those, see them together and separate those out, it can be really hard to even identify what you're trying to get, because you don't have that language, because nobody teaches us this stuff. Really, most of the time when people think there's a color problem, so often it's actually a value problem, not the color. So when I talk about value, or when we move to painting here, I'm going to show you, I really like, when I'm teaching, especially, I always include a black and white version of a reference image, because I find it really helpful for anybody who's struggling to see the value accurately. Having color and black and white side by side gives you the chance to kind of flip back and forth and see for sure, is this a color change, a value change, or both? If you see an edge, if it's a hard edge or a soft edge, and you're transitioning between shapes, are those shapes different in color? Are they different in value? Or are they different in both? And it's so easy to think that it's a color change when it's just a value change, or to not see that the values are the same. Even though there's a color change, the values are actually the same. And little things like that can make the outcome feel like you made a mistake, and it's usually not actually that big of a mistake. It's just that you weren't seeing something the way it actually is. And we're so distracted by color. We give color, really so much credit for things that value is responsible for. Mood is so heavily driven by color composition, or by value. Composition is so heavily driven by value. And then when I talk about color, I am of the school of thought that the specific pigment really doesn't matter that much. It's up to your preference. But I do talk about the primaries, red, yellow, and blue, in terms of warm and cool. And so in my palette, I have a warm version of each, red, yellow, and blue, and a cool version. And the way I think of that, it's easy with, say, a yellow. I've got a yellow that leans towards orange, which in the color wheel, orange is one side of yellow. And I've got a yellow that leans closer towards green, which is its other neighbor on the color wheel. Red, same thing. Its neighbors are orange and purple. So we've got a red that leans towards orange and a red that leans a little more towards purple. And blues get tricky, because blue is in the middle of the cool side of the color wheel, right? So the way I think of whether a blue is warm or cool is how it behaves with the other primary colors. And so blues that lean warm will make a cleaner mix with other warm primaries, and blues that lean cool will make a cleaner mix with other cool primaries. which I may or may not come up in the demo because, you know, we can't cover all the things, but if I talk about color, I usually say warm or cool, red, yellow, blue, because that's really what I'm thinking about. And I could interchange a lot of other pigments. I could take somebody else's palette, and as long as they have those 6 and something dark, I would be fine. I might not love it because it would be my personal choice, but I'd be just fine making a painting. So for tonight, I was asked to maybe do some water and rocks because I get asked about water and rocks a lot because I happen to like to paint them because I happen to live where there are a lot of rocks and water. My style is my approach to painting is time consuming. So unfortunately, I can't do a whole painting for you unless I did this really small thing, which is not really fun to watch in a demo. So this is my reference. And again, I made a black and white version as well. I also suggest to others, unless you're really confident and comfortable and have painted a lot, it can be really helpful, even if you have, to have your reference the same size as your painting. It can really help you see those proportions more accurately. Once you get practice with that, or if your drawing skills are really strong, that becomes less important because you can see those relative proportions. But it's really helpful to just have that subconscious, extra support. You don't have to worry about still one more thing, because as watercolorists, we have enough things to worry about in a painting, and enough things that can go wrong without having to be conscious, constantly vigilant about our proportions. So in this, when I'm, this is not necessarily a really strong example, but you can see there's areas where there's some subtle value shift, but significantly more color shift happening through here, giving the sense of mood. The atmospheric effect makes things look bluer and lighter as they get further away. As we get closer, we're talking about this water. Some of this is areas I have not painted yet. Notice how there's what the values do versus what the colors do. And I've had so many people comment about how hard water is to paint. And I've even had, I couldn't believe it, I was at the American Watercolor Society dinner last month, or no, in April, and actually had a couple of really well-known professionals comment to me, oh, your rocks and water, I really should work on learning how to do rocks and water. And it's just like, I wanted to, like, what? How are you talking about? I want to learn how to do that one particular thing. And I know that's how we think. I know that's how, I've taught young kids who think, oh, I can draw dogs, but I can't draw cats. I want to learn how to draw cats. And my argument would be that drawing is drawing. If you actually understand drawing, and if you understand painting, the subject doesn't matter. And I know it does, but at the same time, my argument is this is all just abstract shapes. Everything in our entire world, looking around the room I'm in, the rooms you're in, it's just combinations of shapes, and those shapes have a value and they have a color. And shapes might be, you might have shapes of one value and color next to another shape where the values are the same between those shapes, but the colors are different, or the colors are about the same, but they're different values. What gets complicated is identifying all of those small changes and smaller shapes of value and color that are different from each other, and identifying what those edges are, if they're a hard edge, a soft edge. But that's it. That's the thing that we're doing. It doesn't matter what the subject is. Certain arrangements of abstract shapes become objects that we identify as, chair or cat or glass or, whatever. And so really, if you can, anytime you catch yourself feeling like something sounds hard or looks hard, stop yourself and think, no. Nothing is actually any harder than anything else. Some things are just more time consuming and more tedious to understand what's going on. So something like this, if you really wanted to get into the fine detail of every little color and value change in here, think of it as if you were to make yourself a paint by number, you would have a whole lot of tiny little shapes for each of those values and colors happening in there. But you could also simplify that and imply the idea of some of those value and color changes. As watercolorists, we can do that with wet on wet. We can drop different colors in and let them blend in a way that implies the sense of slight color and value changes. Maybe you just think, where is it cooler and where is it warmer? I'm just going to catch where it shifts from cooler to warmer and then get the main value changes. If we looked at this black and white, maybe we could identify 30 different values in this photograph. but maybe you don't want to paint 30 different values. You could paint, you could do this as 2 values. Is it black or is it white? Does it lean closer to black? Does it lean closer to white? And you can get an app, an photo editing app on a phone or computer where you can play with the contrast and brightness, and make an image all the way black and white. It's basically a value study or a notan study. That is the key sense of what's happening in your subject, your reference. Whether it's from life or a photograph, it's all the same. What that main structure is what's happening from a compositional standpoint, and the main thing that you need to for sure get in your painting. And then as you add more values to that, more different separated values, the more something feels photographic. So something like this is going to have, maybe technically there's an infinite number. I mean, I'm sure it's not infinite because a printer printed this, and I'm sure that's got limitations. But the way your eye perceives the world, you're picking up a potentially infinite number of variabilities in value and color. And yeah, that's overwhelming. That's a lot of information that, unless you're kind of crazy, and I know I'm kind of crazy, but I'm not all the way there, I don't think. That's too much. So then you have this choice, this spectrum of how far do I want to go between showing 2 values, because if it's just one value, it's either white or black, and then you don't have a painting probably, to all of the values your eye can perceive. And most of us are going to be somewhere in the middle or on the lower end of that spectrum. And the more you have fewer limited values, the more something will feel stylized or simplified. And the more you include those value nuances, the more it feels
It's
photographic.
okay, tomorrow we are meeting, yes?
So those are your options. So that, I mean, there's personal choice in this, and there's, at first you can look at this and just feel overwhelmed. But if you think more simply, if I gave any of you one of these images and, a Sharpie, and said, circle all the lightest lights, you could find them. Circle the darkest darks or outline the darkest darks, you could find them. And then find the middle grays. I'm confident you could make a choice. Does this count as a middle gray or a lightest light? You have to make a choice, but it's going to be one or the other. And a middle gray or a darkest value. And then maybe you add in one more, so you have 5 values. So you have lightest light, medium, lightest light, light medium, medium dark, and darkest dark. And then we just, as you add more of those in, you can, simplify a little bit. You can look at what's the main thing I see happening there. And again, watercolor, we can use it to our advantage, right? You could start with a lighter value, and while it's still a little bit wet, drop in the dark, and you'll get some of that natural spread to represent a value transition without having to actually, by hand, paint each of those value shifts. But that's the idea behind all the things to me. And I know it sounds easier than it is to do, because everything takes time to learn. But anything that seems hard is really just about slowing down and looking at what you're actually looking at. Find the shape, find the value, and then find the color. And to a degree, color is a little arbitrary, right? Every camera is going to perceive color differently. It's going to print different on every kind of paper. So if you're in the ballpark with color, you're going to be good. We're all picky about color to some degree, but that value and the shape is just so important. So I've already started this quite a lot, because I know myself and my speed. And I'm happy to answer questions anytime. Feel free to interrupt me. I think you're supposed to write in the chat, but feel free, and I can be interrupted as I work. Just to explain what I did so far, I feel pretty good about being just about done with kind of the top half. And as we get down, it's less and less finished. So you can see I have some pencil lines I kind of drew around the shapes, but I have lines showing both the object and where I see value shifts. So for instance, there's a rock here where the actual rock is this wide, but there's a distinct color and value change, and I have a line for myself indicating that edge so I don't miss that. Because to me, we culturally think about subject matter, and we think about a rock as a rock, but what's happening within that subject matter shape is the part that matters. And sometimes those shapes aren't actually defined by the subject matter. I'm sure you've seen this in your work. If you think about positive and negative shape and spaces, there's areas where one object blends into the object behind it or next to it. And those things are part of how we perceive the world. So keeping those in as you observe them is really helpful in giving, if you're after a sense of realism, that's a key part of it. But then also catching where you have value shifts and color shifts that don't align with subject matter, because they don't always, is a big part of it too. So I guess I'm just going to kind of dig in here. I'm pretty close to my values, but I think I need to darken some of this maybe. Well, looking on the screen, maybe I don't. That's pretty good. So in here I saved this area because this is usually the kind of stuff that just looks hard. Maybe I'll put the black and white up with it as well. So when I'm painting this, let's see, I tend to want to go with small brushes when it's inappropriate. So I'm trying to teach myself to be a little more conscious in my brush choices, because I want a body that holds enough water to paint larger shapes when I have larger shapes. So let's start in here. I have this rock fairly well controlled. I'm going to get into some darks. I might even think about what I'm working with and just mix up some puddles here. And I'm fairly irreverent about my paint, so I kind of just take what's here and mix stuff in with it. So let's get this kind of brownish, which in some areas looks a little warmer, in some areas a little cooler. So I might actually make myself two puddles. So I'm going to take some red. This is my cool red, not for any good reason other than I like this. It's permanent alizarin crimson, for those that like to know. Again, I don't think it really matters. Any cool red. In this case, when you have colors that are fairly neutral, it usually doesn't matter whether you're on the warm or cool, because you're going to be crisscrossing that color wheel, the warm and cool temperatures anyways, to get something towards neutral. So I might go a little warmer yellow on one side and a cooler yellow on the other. And I am definitely one of the people who struggles to always remember to make big enough puddles. And I will scrape up the dregs in my palette and being too lazy to actually mix more of what I want. Don't do that. It makes it harder. So this is my warm blue, warm yellow, and cool red. So this is kind of too purple. Too purple means I need a little bit more yellow. It's closer. I think it needs a little blue. And then I just triangulate to get to the color I'm looking for. And I'm not that worried about exact color, because again, I know this is not, I go to this river all the time. This is near where I live. And I know what these colors should be because I spent enough time there. So sometimes I'll kind of match what I see, and sometimes I'll change it because you get to do that. Take some cool blue for this side. So I have cool blue, cool yellow, and cool red. But I wanted that a little bit towards green, so I think I need a little more blue and yellow. Now I just have a couple different, I can show you what I have here. A couple different browns. They're similar, but one's a little bit warmer, one's a little, well, never mind, that's not really cooler, is it? Well, whatever, if they're two different ones, I'm good with that. And then I've got these rich kind of, to me, they look really strongly blue, but I know that part of the reason it looks so blue is because what it's next to. So you can hold up a piece of white paper around a shape if you're trying to figure out a color and struggling to identify the color. Surround it with white. That can be a lot easier. And then you can also test out what you're working with and see if your value and color are there. So for instance, I don't know why I just did that on a second piece of paper. You could compare side by side and see if you've got the value there and the color where you want it, if you're trying to match your image. If you like your reference, if you like the mood and the feel in your reference, it should be a red flag to think about changing the value substantially without doing some serious value study work, because changing the values more than just a tiny bit is going to have a potentially huge impact on the sense of mood and atmosphere. And if you are attracted to an image and wanted to paint it in the first place, you are most likely attracted to that because of the mood and atmosphere. So if you start changing it, it can be really frustrating and disappointing later when your painting feels nothing like your reference. So that's just, this is French ultramarine. That's just my warm blue. And I do a thing where I'll look at something like this and exaggerate it really easily. I think we all do that because culturally we tend to exaggerate the things we're looking at because it's easier to tell things apart from each other. It's easier to tell each other's faces apart from each other when we exaggerate the sense of our features. When if you're a portrait artist and you look at people next to each other, if you started measuring facial features, we are almost the same, all of us. We look so much alike, but we exaggerate the sense of that. Or like if you're drawing mountains, it's really common to make the mountains too big because mountains are large. We know that. So we tend to think they look bigger than they actually look. And with color, that can be really intensifying the sense, particularly when there's a contrast next to it. So compared to this brown, that blue is really strong and rich, but obviously nowhere near that rich. So I need to neutralize that. I can use my red, yellow, blue. I often also have on my palette a burnt umber. And I'm a fan of burnt umber and ultramarine together. They make really attractive neutrals. They granulate beautifully together. And it can be a shortcut to getting closer towards neutral. I don't think I'm gonna like that color. Yeah, that's too green. So I'm probably gonna pull into some red to get closer to the color that I want. I also need to check what I was already using on my painting because I did start this already. That's close. We're in the ballpark anyways. And again, any questions, please interrupt. Ask anything, anytime. All questions are good questions. And then I want my darkest dark in here. And darkest darks, you can use things like, and a lot of people like Payne's Gray. I have neutral tint, which is a beautiful neutral color that mixes well with anything. It can get really inky dark, so it's great to have. But I know that if I was sitting here looking at this where it looks really inky dark, it's not going to just be black. It's going to have some color, some reflectivity from the things around. Even though it's a tiny painting, being who I am, I want something more interesting than just a flat kind of black color. So I could, I know my ultramarine here and my burnt umber would get dark enough that I could get that, but I might instead actually, maybe I'll pull some of that neutral tint. It's kind of sometimes it can be almost a purpley. Really, I just want something nice and dark, but that will settle and make a beautiful shape or a beautiful color as it lays. Maybe I will use some of that burnt umber. And I might even consider something that will contrast a little bit. I've got this blue reflected on the sides of the rock, probably because the water here is picking up two things. The reason it's this color is we're reflecting the sky above, so it's picking up some blue from that, but it's also picking up the shadow, the darker values from where the light is not hitting the sides of the rocks that are under the water. And that color is reflecting off the sides of the rock that are not getting lit because of my angle to that water. Not that that matters. You just paint what you see. And because of that, those colors being so close, I think I want something that's going to not just be darker, but also a little bit different color and picking up probably some of the color off the rocks, which probably has a little bit of purple, brown, gray, something in there. It doesn't matter as long as it's nice and dark. So now I've got something really nice and dark. I've got my blue. I don't know that you know what I was doing? I started comparing to what I already had here, which is not what I meant to make. Because I know people like to know the materials that artists use, I will comment that I am currently traveling. I'm at my parents' house, and this is not my usual palette. I like a larger palette without the barrier is usually what I use. So at home, I have a John Pike palette, and I love that because it has this huge mixing area and I can have all sorts of puddles all over pre-made and ready, and it's just larger. The mixing space is probably the size of this entire palette. This still has nice large wells, so I like it just fine. It has a lid and it travels well. And it fit into my carry-on better. So here we are. Okay. I don't paint things the same way every time. Sometimes I will paint one color every place I see that color. Sometimes I will paint just top to bottom done as I go. It kind of depends on my mood, what I'm seeing and thinking. So my philosophy is there's no one right way. You just kind of do what suits who you are and your mood and temperament at the time that you're painting. And I'm seeing slight value changes. This is a small painting, so it matters a little bit less, but there's slight value changes happening on the edges of that. So I'm just going to lighten before I get to the end of that shape. So it's just a slight variation. Let's see, and this is actually a bit of a brown. So apparently today I'm going one area next to another and not all one color first or one style of color or shape. So it varies. Those are all below ground. So maybe we'll do all of these. I don't know how well you can see it. There's a bit of texture for these rocks that are under the water. You can get this texture because that water up above has ripples and things, and it makes little shadows on the rock below. And if you are crazier than I am, you might actually try to paint each of those. I look at what's the style of what's happening. Is it, if it was straight ripples, you might see like concentric circles. Then I would paint that shape. If I see wiggles, if they're really clearly defined, I will worry more about what the look is. In this case, it's kind of just chaotic lights and darks and a texture that's sort of both linear and horizontal and kind of wavy. So as long as I have a mix of sort of horizontal here, linear here, and kind of wavy, it's gonna feel like that. And if I miss it, it's not really gonna matter. It'll just make the water look like it was more still in that area, which is just fine because nobody knows they weren't standing there with me. Different weather, different days. And I don't think I'm dark enough here. And I know for sure I didn't mix my puddles up dark enough. And my brush might be too large. I'm going to blend some of that out into the rock next door. Another thing you can do, and again, back to there's no one right way to paint. When I'm looking at something really challenging, I often look for ways to make it more simple. My brain has gotten so used to the kinds of shapes that show up in the things I like to paint that so much is so much easier for me than it was 5-10 years ago, that I now paint very differently. But one of the things I used to do is look for opportunities, well, I guess I still do, look for opportunities where you wouldn't have to paint things as separate entities. So in this area right here, everything that's more bluish is also darker than everything that's more brownish. If that bluish is a little bit neutral, I could paint that in a stronger blue, less neutral, paint all those blue shapes a little stronger, which I kind of did. I think I could do it actually here to show you. And then you could take the brown and go right over that whole area and go much faster and make that blue a little bit more of the neutral that you were after in the first place without having to make it a separate shape. This all just becomes one. And I'm on 300-pound paper today, so I'm having to use more brush strokes than I usually would do. Now I do need to be careful. I've got a line here where part of this rock is above water. And it's a nice clean edge. It's not a soft transition. It's a very sharp transition here. Very crisp transition. So I want to make sure that I'm fluid enough as I push the paint through there that it will have the look I'm after. One of the things that I tended to some years ago do, it still pops up. I think your brain just retains old habits easily. I would do a lot of small brush marks. And I think that some of what we see often when we watch other artists paint is this, fast movement. and you kind of mimic it without thinking about it. And I spent some time really trying to think about the marks I'm making with the brush as very intentional and trying to make them more, oops, I didn't want to be right there. Trying to make them more intentional. So slowing down, thinking about how fluid you are, making sure you have this nice bead of fluid paint that you can push around instead of all the tiny little wipey marks, which I still end up doing out of some weird old habit. And then this is another spot where some of the rock is out of water. And running out of my brown. Oh, too much blue. This is the phthalo blue. So I keep 4 blues on my palette. I don't, for some reason, I seem to, more than any other color, I like having more variety in my blues. I honestly would be happy with just 1 red. For most of the things I paint, I would be happy with 1 red. It would get me where I want to go. But when it comes to the blues, I have my warm and cool, but I have both a staining and a granulating. And for me, that just makes me happier. I have found that I don't like using just granulating blues in my sky because they lift and shift in a weird way as I'm putting my brush marks down. I get less even distribution, which probably says something about my patience and skills. But whatever. If I do a mix of both in my skies, the staining will help kind of carry, you still see the granulation, but it's not as, I don't know, it shifts differently. I like it, works for me. But you know, do whatever you like. I think when you're first learning to paint, it's really best to just pick something and start and work with it enough that you get a chance to learn how it works. And then once you've learned how that works, you can start, you know, throw something in to experiment with, but maybe not too many things. Pick one direction to go, maybe play with paper and see what paper you like best. Maybe play with pigments, see which pigments you like best. But if you change too many things all at once, it's hard to tell what had, whoops, too much. Which change is making the effect that you like or don't like. I'm a fan of experimenting and playing, but with some amount of intention and control. Okay, where am I here? This rock. Some of that looks maybe a little dark. So before it gets dry, I'm just going to take my dry brush and lift. Maybe it's just that I want it a little more uneven because there's some texture to those rocks. And I was just putting one smooth application down. So you can build texture and value changes wet on wet. You can do it dry on dry, dry on wet. You can, you know, anything you want to do, whatever you like and however your brain thinks works. You can watch how other people paint and see if there's something they do that you really like the look of. That's great. But I would like to be somebody, if nobody else ever says it to you, somebody who says, whatever works for you is just fine. There's no, you know, for any look I'm after, most of the time, there's multiple ways to get there. There's not one right thing. And I hear so much from people where you should always this or never this, especially in watercolor. And it's a medium. Do with it whatever you like, however it works for you. If you want to paint opaque, paint opaque. If you want to paint only transparent, paint only transparent. It's all good. This area, I'm realizing I might get a little lost. There's some shadows and things through here, some stronger value changes that I haven't mapped in, which I should have mentioned. When I was starting here, you saw all these small, darker shapes. Part of the reason I put those in first is I will sometimes map in my darkest values just to help me keep track because those pencil lines can disappear as you work. I have learned that sometimes it suits my brain or my mood, especially if I'm feeling a little uncertain or insecure in what I'm painting. I will take my neutral tint, or you can use any staining dark pigment somewhat lightly, and you can, actually, I'll just do it with that right now. So I'll just take a little corner over here of my neutral tint, and I will just indicate out some of these darkest values. So this is not as dark as I'm going to go. This is a pigment that I know I can adjust the color to make it match what I'm seeing and what I want to have. But this will show through my mid-value layers and help map for me what I'm intending to have happen when I get to those other layers, just so I can find them again without having to redraw or accidentally make a mark where I didn't want it to be. Most things aren't actually really that important that they're exactly the same, but at the same time, if you had a plan and you accidentally do something that wasn't what you planned, it can really throw off your confidence. So if, things like this make it a little bit easier, it's like giving yourself a bit of a roadmap so you have a better sense of where you're trying to go. And it doesn't even have to be every last shape, but if it's enough shapes that you can kind of track where you're going, it can be really helpful. I will do that sometimes in things like these trees back here. I don't think of this as painting every tree. I think of this as painting value masses. So when I was drawing this out, what I was looking at is this shape of, the shapes that kind of look like this, and the way those darker values connect with each other. That's all for me one shape. And if I want to give the sense of it being trees in there, that's all done for me wet and wet. I'm, starting with the lightest value I see in there and then dropping in little bits of changes of color or changes in value or both to get that sense of tree. I'm not painting trees. I'm just painting shapes. And those shapes, largely where there's value variations, the level of detail you're seeing here, it's vertical. There's not much horizontal movement in this area, it's vertical. So when I'm bringing my brush in when it's still wet, I'm kind of working more vertically. And then these other shapes, the complexity of shape I'm looking at is just where are the darkest darks and what are those shapes. So when I was drawing this out, it looked something like that. And then I will come in with my neutral tint and do a very light wash over the darkest shapes. Hopefully this gives you the idea, even though it's kind of sloppy. And that's what I was looking at. And that's kind of like an underpainting, like oil painters will do. I'm very much not an oil painter, but I think that can be really helpful. Again, it's like a roadmap to follow. I don't go to the darkest darks. I'm just blocking out these shapes that I see in here and looking for ways to unite these shapes and simplify. So this is a lot faster to paint than it looks like it might be. I'm thinking, how can I simplify that? Give the sense of trees without painting all those trees. A few in front, I'm thinking about tree, but by the time I get over here, even it's much more just about the style of abstract shape. Is it vertical? Is it horizontal? Is it angled? Where are the value changes? Lighter towards the outside, darker towards the middle, or is that staggered and broken up in different ways? And if I get the tops to be very similar shapes, and even just that is enough to imply the idea of tree through the rest. I don't actually have to make, somebody just gave you this, you might not look at that and think, oh, that's trees, or if we get small enough in here. But in context with everything else, it feels like tree because I really articulated some of the trees and then I let others become, shapes, but shapes that are matching the feel of the shapes here. That makes sense. That's my way of simplifying. And I love looking for those opportunities too, because they're a little bit more fun to handle, a little bit more of a challenge because you can do them differently every time. And it's something to play with in a painting. You could do a little trial run on a scrap piece of paper and see what you like the look of. But that same idea is what I'm doing down here just by blocking out some of the shadow shapes. And I did get some of it already, but there's some other things. And I don't have to get every single one. If I get enough that I can find the relative position of things later, that's good enough. And really, who's going to know the exact rock positions here? I like painting exactly what I see because for me, it's a sense of study and discovery of what is it about that rock that feels like that rock. And I find that really fun. Other artists are happy to make a painting that feels like a painting of rocks, water, and trees. I'm interested in these rocks, these trees, and this water. And neither of those is better or worse than the other. They're just different motivations and different interests. So whatever motivates you, is how you should paint. Even if,
Jessica, can I interrupt just for a
Please.
second? We had a couple of questions about,
great.
well, first of all, the location you referenced was near where you live. Is
Yeah.
it a particular park or?
No, this is actually, what is this? I think this stretches Forest Service land. I live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, northern Idaho, close to the border of Washington. And I live a few blocks from this large lake, and tributaries to the lake, we have a couple of really nice rivers that have some really great fly fishing opportunities. Some have some wilderness, one is wild and scenic. This river is very heavily used by a lot of people, and I just love it. This is a day trip for me. I can drive up here and spend a day driving along the river, lower and higher elevations. And especially in the fall and spring when there aren't very many people out, you can be alone and hardly see anybody all day. Summertime, not so much. Summertime is insane, but
Thank you. And I wish we could all be there. Then the next couple of questions were to do with colors.
yeah,
Can you review the blues that you use? Is it phthalo and
sure.
ultramarine?
Yeah, right now my staining blues are phthalo, both green shade and red shade. Red shade is my warm, green shade is my cool. And then for the granulating pigments that I am currently using, I have French ultramarine and a cerulean blue. And I don't love this cerulean. It's got a little bit of chalkiness to it that I'm not a fan of. And I don't love how it mixes for some things. I like it for certain things. But I have hunted around and tried a lot of cool blues and have not found anything else that is that strongly cool. And so I don't get the color mixes I'm after. So I'm kind of stuck there, not because I love it, just because it's the best I've found so far.
Awesome. And then somebody noticed that you had a bright green in your palette. What's
I
that?
do. That is, oh, what do they call it? I think it's permanent green light. It's a Daniel Smith color. I think
Yeah.
it has phthalo blue, and it's basically just a shortcut color. I end up doing a lot of greens. I prefer to mix my greens, but it can be nice in some paintings just to have the shortcuts. And I can make that green by mixing my phthalo blue and my very cool yellow.
Perfect.
But it's, again, shortcuts are nice. But they're only shortcuts if you know how to mix them. And otherwise, they're crutches and can make painting harder.
Great, thank you.
Yes. And please really ask anything. I'm happy to be honest about any of this stuff, any of the struggles. I can also say that no matter why you want to paint and what you're doing with it, you're doing great. There's so many different ways to paint, so many different ways to think about it, so many different materials you could use, and whatever you find that you like, that brings you joy, that makes it worth sitting down to paint, then that's what you want to find, and that's what you want to do.
So the follow-up question was, what about your yellows? What are your yellows?
Yeah, okay. So my dark yellow is gamboge, or I think it's new gamboge. Oh, I don't know. There's a couple different, I use a few different brands and they're about the same. So they kind of get interchanged. The yellow was actually a big struggle for me to find. It's Daniel Smith and it is lemon yellow. And probably most of you know this already, but paint names are not regulated in any way. So just because two pigments made by different companies have the same name does not mean they're going to be anything like each other in terms of color. There are other brands that make a lemon yellow and it is chalky and opaque. Great for certain things, but I was looking for a transparent, very cool yellow that is light fast and permanent. This is the only one I found.
Awesome. And then the next part was, what about your reds? So I know you said alizarin.
I do. I have permanent alizarin, and that's my cool. And my warm right now is a quinacridone red.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and then I have burnt umber on here. We talked through those. I'm not actually positive which, I think this is a sap, and I don't know whose it is. I have a few different tubes that I've had for forever. I hardly ever use it, but it lives here because once in a while I hit a painting where I use it a lot. But it's been different from different brands, and it's just kind of like a medium green. It's kind of, most greens from a tube are icky as they come out of the tube, and you have to do something to adjust them. Part of why I like mixing my greens from primary colors because you have a little bit more control. And then this is undersea green, which is a really interesting color that somebody talked me into buying some time ago, and I just won't use it, and then kind of got hooked, and it lives in my palette, and I also don't use it very often. I go through a tube maybe every 2-3 years. But that could change tomorrow. I could hit a series of paintings where I just love it and use it all over the place. So I painted around a few areas where it's a little bit more strongly blue, just because I wasn't positive if this brown would be too much to neutralize that more than I was looking for. Make sure I'm kind of, yeah, that'll be good. So I'm just gonna paint. For here, I'm being careful that I am dry. Now, there's some really interesting reflective stuff happening right in here. I am going to skip that because I don't think that really matters at all, honestly. And I wouldn't have to go around this dark shape. I could paint right over that, but honestly, I'm not gonna be able to find that line. And when I'm doing demonstrations and I'm talking, it's really easy to do something with my brush that I didn't intend to do. So I draw more lines than I necessarily would otherwise need to, and try to follow a plan more than I necessarily do on my own, because I can get sort of, I don't know, irreverent and feisty and grouchy about things that I'm doing and go off script and start changing things and then end up really unhappy with it. And that's just part of my process. I do that less the longer I paint, but I don't know. It's how we learn to try things. Maybe they work. Maybe we wish we hadn't done them later. So I'm just taking, as I get towards the end of a shape and there's a little bit too much paint in this puddle, I'm just drying my brush out so I can soak up the last little bits there so I don't get a hard edge. Because remember, the illustration I did at the beginning, if this shape that I'm making here has too much paint on the edges, if the edges are heavy and very wet, that also has more pigment. So as the water dries, you're going to get pigment sliding to the sides of that little bubble, and making a hard outline, which sometimes can be a great look and exactly what you want, and sometimes can be frustrating and disappointing when it happens. And where am I? Like that. Again, don't have to match exactly what I see while it's on my brush. I'm just doing a few of the other shapes I see right in here. I see a few darks that are kind of separating a sense of rocks. I've got some strong value contrast in this area, and really it's a little softer than I painted it, and there's more different values happening in there. So I'm just, while I see it, kind of starting to work that in. See some texture here. Not trying to match every shape, but again, the style of shape. So I'm looking at, is it linear? Is it, is it a blob? Does it have round edges? Does it have sharp, pointy edges? Does, what's the style of shape I'm seeing? And if I'm close to that, it's gonna, from a distance, read the same or feel like I handled it similarly. And I made this wider than it is, so I'm making some stuff up on the edge just because my frame will end up covering some of that edge. And so I've learned the hard way that you don't want to design to an edge that's going to get cropped off, because sometimes you lose parts of the painting that you really wanted. So I always try to make up a little something on the edge so the frame covers something I don't care about as much. Okay, that's another of my, I think this is drying up. When I'm making shapes, so these feel to me just very smooth and crisp. This is it's a very flat shape, these blues. So my preference would be to handle them in one layer, but I can already see I didn't get dark enough on some of these because I was in a hurry and not paying attention. And I might not be dark enough here either because I'm talking and not paying attention. My preference would be 1 or 2 layers that have very clean edges to these shapes, but it's very flat. There's not texture in these areas. That's part of what makes it feel like water. So if I start adding texture in some of this, it's not going to feel like it's reflecting. It's a very smooth, flat shape. And then where the rocks are has lots of texture because that's areas where we're seeing through seen through and down below under the water. We can see the texture in those rocks, but where these shadows are, it's blocking the light, which would be picking up that texture. So I'm trying to think about some of that. And when I'm trying to do a smooth shape without texture, it's really helpful to have a large enough puddle, which I need to stop pretty soon here and mix more. Helps to have a large enough puddle, and that's not the right value, the right color, a large enough puddle, and then a very smooth application with your brush with the right amount of water. So I'll just, when I get this mixed, I'll show you what I mean really quick. How are we doing on time? Should check that. About an hour in, so we have one more hour.
We have, it is just after 8 o'clock, so you have at least an hour, sure.
Excellent. Oh, I think we might actually finish this. I shouldn't say that. I'm gonna jinx it. But okay, what did I use in this? I think I had a little bit of my burnt umber. And so most colors, especially if they're a little bit neutralized, there's more than one way to mix the same color. So I'm often not that worried about getting exactly, that's close enough, pretty close. I don't think this is dark enough. Unfortunately, I wasn't really thinking about what I was doing. But that's okay. I've told myself for some years now that it's okay if I make mistakes when I'm doing a demonstration, because all that does is allow me to demonstrate more things, like how I would fix mistakes. So it's not completely a loss. Oh, I know what I was going to show you. If I had a shape, I don't know, make up some kind of amoeba-like shape. If I want a really smooth application through a shape, one thing that I learned to pay attention to is what part of the brush I'm pointing towards edges, because your control is really whatever you're pointing the brush into. The back edge of a shape is so pressure dependent that it's, even with a lot of experience, it's pretty easy to accidentally make a little blip outside of the shape. So if I'm painting a large shape, I'm not just outlining, I'm thinking about how much paint I have, making sure that I have a puddle, and I'm thinking about kind of drawing a curtain across the shape. So I will move my paper, move my arm so I can point my brush into my edges and really control the edges. And then I don't want to go back into that end once it's done because that's starting to dry. And I'm just continuing to pull the paint over, but as soon as it, and I don't know if you can make that out, but as soon as this little bead of water starts to dry, that's when you need to pick up more and keep going. And when you get to the end, if you have a bead that's kind of too wet at the end, a little extra blob of paint, that's when you dry your brush, soak it up so it looks about like the same amount everywhere else. And then when that dries, that's going to be a nice and smooth application. This is a granulating color, so it should settle out and look really beautiful, because I was trying to just float one wash across that shape, not going back in, not outlining and then coming to fill it in with watercolor. That's really challenging because as soon as you put paint down, it's starting to dry. And so as it's starting to dry, now we're getting into this business. Starts to dry, you paint something next to it, it's wetter, it's going to push over into that shape. It's going to mix unevenly. You might get a bloom, you might get a kind of reverse bloom, you might be really unhappy. And that's just how the paint how the medium works. But it can be so frustrating if you forget about that as you're working. I'm going to come in, I think, oh, one more area here that I didn't get the blue, and then I'm going to darken the areas that I wish I had painted a little bit darker to start with. I usually paint pretty vertically. I have back issues and chronic pain and a whole mess of things. And so I've had to paint vertically for quite some time. And it really taught me a lot about water control, because I like to work fluidly. But unless, sometimes I'll lay something flat for a short time. But I had to learn how to control, be fluid, but control it enough that I could still work vertically and get the shapes I wanted. Blessing in disguise, maybe? I'm thinking about where I want really sharp edges to make sure that I'm fluid enough. Because I'm on 300-pound paper here, that I'm going to get a clean edge and not bumps from the texture of the paper. Oh, I know something else I could show with this maybe. If you end up with areas, do I have a good one here? I don't yet. Maybe I can show it later. Sometimes you'll paint something and end up with a shape that you wanted smooth and even, but part of it ends up lighter or darker and is not actually even. And that happened to me a lot in my earlier years. And I never gave up on a painting because I would be 3 or 4 weeks into a painting and I'm not going to start over. I was trying to sell my work and make a living. And you just can't afford the time to start a new painting once you're that far in. So I learned how to fix a lot of stuff just by necessity. And it comes back to this same idea. If you have, if you have a shape that you painted and parts of it got darker and the rest was, not quite that dark. If you think of it, from the side, you just had heavier paint in one area and a lighter application in another area. So all you need to do, find the in-between value. So let's say this is like, I don't know, 1 or 2 value and this is a 5. You're going to need to add about, 3 layers of value to make this match this. You just have to be really careful with that edge so that you're pushing right up to the edge and not overlapping again. Because once you overlap, it's transparent. You're going to see through those layers and it'll look darker. Tedious and obnoxious. Not for everybody, but if your brain works that way, you can adjust and fix a lot of things. But that doesn't mean you need to want to work that way. I'm definitely not an artist that thinks you should paint like me. You should paint like you. And this works great for me. I love the way I paint and the sense of discovery and whatever that I get out of working the way I work. But somebody else is going to have a whole different temperament and way of thinking and looking at things, and they should paint to match that because that's what makes art interesting to look at. We don't all do the same thing. I spent a lot of years feeling like everything I did wasn't good enough. In every way conceivable, I've been through little crises of self and identity and whatever. So I really like to push the idea of however you want to work is how you should work, because you're your own person and nobody else can tell you how you should be working because they're not you. You've got to find what works for you, what makes you happy to do, because boy, if we don't enjoy what we're doing, we're not going to keep doing it and then we won't really get very good and we'll give up and quit. And, that's not fun. Okay, let's get some of the darkest darks in there. So as I do this, I know that often it comes out as, oh, it's coming to life, it's becoming rocks. I really want you to try to notice that how do I say this? This is not a class, this is just a demo and you're getting to watch how I work. But I really want to try to emphasize that I am thinking in terms of shape and value. And that to me, no matter how you want to work, that's the universal thing. That's the key to however it is you're wanting to work. Those are really the 2 main structures that drive anything we make. It's dry. So I'm going to come and get some of these. That's not dark enough. And some of those shapes are getting small enough. I'm going to switch to a slightly smaller brush. I don't love the color that is. It's what I'm seeing, but I don't actually like it. So I might change it. If I'm not happy with a color, I try to come back to, or even when I'm trying to match a color, I try to come back to warm and cool. What am I seeing? And I think part of what I'm not liking is the blues are nice and cool, kind of leaning towards purpley. I guess purple is leaning towards whatever. Maybe that's leaning more warm, and I want this to be a little bit more cool. Yeah, it's into the purples, which has a bit of red through here, although I didn't paint it that way. I could still change that because I'm not as, I could get slightly darker and if I did a wash of red. This is just the way I think. This is me being a perfectionist. This is not how anybody else needs to think or paint. And that looks like, now that I get this dark inky blackish color down here, it's making this side of my rock look too light. And I'm actually happy about that because I'd like to put some more texture in there. And that just means I have a lot of room to play with texture. There's another area where it's not quite all the same value, and I do want to play around with that. I want some areas here where it's a little bit lost and found, so I'm just going to put some of this darkest value up into that, the side of that rock, and then before it dries, I'm going to soften it. Maybe I'll do a little bit of that over here too, just to give a sense of texture and to not have everything separated, because it's not really how we perceive things like this. You know, it's a shadowed side. Parts of it are going to kind of disappear into other shapes. Plus, the way we look at the world, you know, I do paint very detailed, but also when you're looking at a shape or a subject out, you know, in your room or outdoors, wherever you are, we don't focus on everything all at once. A camera can focus on every distance all at once. Our eyes don't really do that. So if we paint everything we see in full articulated detail, it's kind of exhausting to look at and not very realistic, which, you know, seems a little counterintuitive that if you paint everything exactly as it looks, it can end up looking unrealistic. But that easily can happen, which you might love. Some people love that look and that's exactly what they're after. Other people can't stand that look and are never after that, and what have you. But how, if you find that happening in your own work, you might think about, are you giving some shapes the opportunity to blend into others, or some things to be a lot less detailed, less carefully articulated? You can play with driving eye movement by what you highlight, or, you know, things that you make more clear will probably attract more time from the viewer's eye. So you can a little bit control eye movement with that, or even at least just, you know, think about maybe sometimes staggering the amount of detail you have. Just like when we're designing composition, we're thinking about value structures and value masses and how shapes relate to each other, and, you know, repeating colors and having some color harmony. You can also think about repeating areas of, and repeating and varying areas of more and less detail. This is a little darker through there. And if there's areas in a reference that you're looking at that you can't quite tell what's going on, that's a little bit of a red flag. And you probably want to take some time to understand what's happening, or see if it's something that you can give an impression of without knowing exactly what's happening. And if you can't, if it's something you really just can't figure out, or it's too busy and you can't come up with a good way to simplify it, that sometimes is an indicator that you don't actually want to paint that subject, because you're not going to be able to do it in a way that you're happy with. And it might be something to set aside and look at again after some time has passed and you've had different kinds of experiences or different practices with other subjects, or, you know, what have you. Okay, area that gets pretty dark. This spot back here. If this were a much larger painting, I would be looking at more nuances of whether there's tiny little reflections in spots where the rock meets the water. And I see a few back here that I kind of just skipped over because as soon as I pull back from my image 3-4 feet, those disappear and I can't even see them. So they're really only going to be for a viewer that's willing to come within a couple feet. And when you get to that level of detail, then it's personal choice whether it needs to be there or not. It does not need to be there to make the subject read as what it is. But if it's something you enjoy and you like and you want to have that there, then you get to paint it there. And if you don't want to deal with the extra time it would take to put that in, then you don't have to do that. Just gonna lift a little bit so there's again a little touch of color variation. And I really exaggerated my blues through here, and I'm mostly okay with that, I think. All right. Oh, this gets darker. Well, and I kind of made some of this up, so this is going to be a little bit fudgy. If you paint similar subjects over and over again, which probably many of you have done, yeah, it gets easier to invent new things or make adjustments based on experience. And if you haven't spent a lot of time with a particular subject, it's a really good idea to do some trial runs or do a number of paintings where you really are trying to follow what you see so you can understand that. Now, that said, I'm not somebody, like I said, who makes like has a oh, what am I trying to say? I don't make all rocks the same way. I don't handle grasses always the same way. I don't handle trees always the same way. And some artists do. Some artists are, here's my approach for trees. Here's my technique for trees or my technique for grasses. Nothing wrong with that. That's just great. It doesn't work for me. That I find that boring and I don't know, whatever. It doesn't work for me. I tend to like to do things the hard way, I guess. And I like the sense of discovery with each new subject. I like looking at what's going on, what makes it feel the way it feels. I want to handle it a little differently and see it for itself instead of making assumptions. But again, I'm not painting trees just to paint the sense of tree. I'm painting trees to paint that particular stand of trees because that's what excites me. And that is not necessarily something that should excite anybody else. That's just part of who I am. And time to mix more. Any more questions about anything?
There were a couple of questions, I guess, more about what you would do before or after. One is, do you use a sketchbook? And if so, how?
Okay.
And the other one had to do with the hardness of the pencil that you use when you draw your image on the paper.
Gotcha. There are a few things that I'm always the same about how I handle them. I don't know what that is other than just my personality. I use a number of different pencils for different reasons. I like different ones. When I'm doing a demonstration, I like a nice dark hard line so you can see it more easily. And so for that, this is, I like the black Wayne pencils because they're beautiful and not because they're like a better drawing tool. You can use anything you want to use and anything that makes you happy. I used to use very hard pencils with very light line because I was worried about pencils showing through. And then with time and experience, I learned that hardly ever do my pencil lines show through a painting. If I'm working in a full range of values and putting water over things, usually that graphite kind of gets washed into the mix. And also, if you go to major museums, I've seen a JMW Turner painting that had a nice pencil outline around the setting sun. So, you know, it's personal taste. If you don't like the look of pencils, you might want to work with a harder pencil that's a soft, I mean, with a light touch. A harder pencil will also dent your paper more and can make little troughs that your paint pools into. But if you like that to disappear, use a light touch and a harder lead, and it will be a lighter pencil mark. If you're, you know, if you like that darker line, a softer pencil. But yeah, I don't, you know, whatever you like and whatever works for you. And the other question was about a sketchbook. I
Yes.
have sketchbooks. I have historically not been somebody who does the best practices for things. I grew up playing a lot of instruments. My mom was my piano teacher, so unfortunately, when it's your mom, she knows whether or not you practice because she lives with you. I never really liked practicing. For the most part, I didn't enjoy practicing most of my instruments that I've played. But for me, my motivation with playing music is a group experience. I really like playing with other people. I love band, orchestra kinds of settings. That's where I get excited and happy. And playing by myself is like, ugh, that's boring. Now that's changed. I play piano for fun. I'm not very good, but who cares? I enjoy it, so I do it. Um, but I've been the same way with art too. Like you're supposed to, sketch all the time and be practicing drawing all the time. And for the most part, I never wanted to do that. I never did value studies. I do them when I'm teaching. So now I've gotten pretty good at them because I've made myself do them for teaching. And I'm grateful for that because I otherwise would not do them. And I will do them to show what I've done on a piece with some exceptions. When there were paintings where I really wasn't sure how something's going to work out, or I was changing things or combining images to make one, I would draw them out and I would sometimes practice the shapes and things that I saw so that I could maybe hopefully get them the way I intended to in the painting. Most of the time, though, I have not been someone who's enjoyed that. Again, that's been changing. So I don't think there's one right way. Certainly, a lot of things would have been quicker if I had done more sketchbook time and more value studies. I would have learned some things quicker than I did because I was doing it the hard way and figuring it out while painting the painting, making mistakes, having to try to figure out how to fix them. And that some of that could have been bypassed, but that apparently is my learning style for some things. So I think you do what works for you. I use, like I said before, I use my camera for sketching a lot and played with composition and figuring out what I wanted things to look like through the camera lens because that was familiar and I enjoyed it. And it gave me an excuse to keep photographing. And my husband would buy me a really nice new camera every handful of years. And I probably wouldn't have gotten that if it wasn't for so there's that. So it'd be hypocritical of me to say that, oh yes, you should always be sketching all the time. It comes with a lot of benefits. And I have gone through a lot of time wishing that I was that person, that I spent more time and that I'm not good enough as an artist because I don't. But you have to be who you are. And some things about yourself are hard to change.
Well, don't you think by embracing the ability to use the camera and the photocopier to get the values, that you're really just taking advantage of the technology we have
I
and spending
do.
time where you
I
want
do.
it?
But
Yeah.
and also I think that's absolutely true. And also it's true that for me, for what my goals were with my career, for as somebody who wanted to make this a career in the first place, which is not something you have to want to do. It comes with its own sets of challenges and can make some things less fun and all of that. It's not something everyone should necessarily want to do. I did want to do that. And so as someone who wanted to do that and wanted to feel like I was, good enough or that I was good or that I was a real artist. I wanted those skills and I did draw a lot. I drew growing up. I drew all through college. So I did have some decent drawing skills. And one thing I did do for 10 years until COVID kind of interrupted things, I did weekly life drawing in watercolor. And we alternated, it'd be 3 hour sessions and we do full figure one week and portrait the next week. And so I was trying to get a likeness in, a few hours or less when it was full figure, because trying to get someone's face in 20 minutes is something else. And for me, that was drawing practice. For me, that was honing it worked well for me because it wasn't landscape. So I didn't, because you're working fast, it's a different style. I wasn't as cruel to myself in my critique as I am with my plein air. Because in plein air, I'm expecting to like it as much as I like my studio work, which itself I struggle with liking my work because it's always what I could have handled different or better, or what I don't understand yet or wish I did. And that's lifelong. That does not, hopefully that never ends, or it would be very boring and we probably all quit. And I'm comfortable now with, I know what I know for now, and I'll know more stuff after the next painting and the next and the next. And I don't feel as threatened with the fact that I don't know all the things yet. Nobody does. Nobody knows all the things. We're all in a different place. And I've had students who come in and teach me things that they've picked up and learned in places. And I don't think that makes me less of an artist, because we only run across the things we run across. But it took me a long time to get past a lot of those feelings. So some of that, I think maybe doing more like value studies and things, that played into that for me, because if you're not doing that, you're not a real artist. You should love doing that. You should always love sketching, because all these amazing artists always loved sketching. So am I not actually a good real artist because I don't love the sketching? You know, we are who we are. And you know,
When you do you ever use, sorry, I'm going to another question that someone's
Yeah,
put in. Do you ever use a grid to transfer your image onto the watercolor paper?
I have not done that. I did that when I was younger for large drawings, when I was doing mostly drawing. Actually, probably because teachers said that's what you should do. I have not done it with a watercolor. I have, when I'm on a time crunch, I will sometimes trace or project. And I used to struggle with that too. But honestly, you know, if you're gonna do it professionally, yes, having strong drawing skills is huge, because every mark you make with your brush is drawing, and your ability to control those shapes and the style of mark with your brush, you know, drawing gets you there. It gets you more of that experience. But if, you know, even there, if you're a professional and you're on a time crunch and you do know how to draw, like, do we have to prove something with every single painting? I mean, probably not really. And if you're not trying to be a professional and you're not, you know, telling people that you're drawing everything by hand, what harm is there in tracing things if your drawing skills aren't super strong and you don't really care, you just want to have fun painting? Who are you hurting by just tracing and getting onto the painting part because you have fun with it? So, you know, I think there's lots of legitimate reasons to project or trace or grid or whatever. And there's also legitimate reasons to freehand draw. It depends on who you are and why you're doing what you're doing and what your motivations are. So if any of you are somebody who's felt bad about any of that, I hereby am somebody giving you permission to just do this in the way that makes you feel good, because, you know, life is short. There's enough stuff to feel bad about. We don't need more reasons to feel bad about ourselves. I'm getting to some nitpicky stuff here. I didn't even finish what I was doing before. My brain just switched to being interested in something else. So now I've switched over to some of these textures, and I know this is probably hard to see, so I'll hold it up as I get a little bit further and you can see. I'm just doing a couple so I can show you how I would handle this. And then, because that's really right now, that will kind of focus. What I've handled here, this is a softer look and has more value nuances, and this right now just has the two values. So I would then come in with a clean and mostly dry, oops, that's not so much dry. Clean and dry brush, and I'll just soften out some of those edges. I'll look for areas on that rock where the texture goes away and just soften some of those. And then I could also see how wet that is. Still got a little bit of a sheen. I could also come in, and this side it looks like has some darker little marks, so I could drop in where it's still a little wet, a few darker little bits. So now I've painted in there maybe 4 values, and the paint and water are spreading out a little bit to give the sense of a few more values. Is not exactly what's here. I don't love it. Move that. Move that. But it's close enough that, you know, once it's here, I mean, it's a little bit light on the value yet, but it's relatively close. Because I want that texture in there, I'm probably gonna let that dry, and then I might do one light wash on top to get it a little bit darker. I try to pay attention when I'm gonna do something, handle something that way, that my lightest value is actually where I'm starting. But you know, value and color are relative. Our perception of them changes based on what they're next to. So it's really easy to look at something and think that you're in the right place for those lights, and then as soon as you put the dark next to it, it looks too light. It's okay. This is transparent. I can put a light wash right on top and not, if I'm quick about it, it won't disrupt what I have underneath and it will just bring it where I want it to be. So I'm not too worried about it. So right now I'm just I think I'm gonna take this kind of bluish neutral I have. It's kind of in the medium light value range, and I'm just looking for some of the places where I see a little bit of that value or close to that value. And it's kind of just texture. I'm just lightly trying to irregularly touch the brush to my paper. It doesn't have to exactly match what I see, but I'm trying to be kind of pretty close to the style of look and shape that I'm seeing there. So some shapes, we're going to get things next to each other that have lost and found edges. And as some of these get closer to the foreground, I might give them a little more attention as far as softening edges and getting a more careful approach. If a few of them up close are more carefully handled and the ones further back are similarly handled but a little less carefully, the viewer is going to look at it, notice the detail, and then assume you did the same amount of detail everywhere. And a lot of people tell me that, my work is so detailed and I've painted every last leaf on every tree. Like, well, at most I paint a few exact leaves, and that gives the impression of me having painted all of them if the way I handle the rest of them is similar in style, texture, value, color. And so you can trick the viewer's eye into thinking that you did detail that you didn't actually do. And I play with that. I find that fun. I play with that a lot. Some things I actually do handle more things more detailed, and other paintings I'll let really large areas go quite abstract. And it's fun to see how much things will feel like they're not abstract, even if they are. Just because of the information in other parts of the painting. Oh, too much. So I'm painting this a little bit more dry because I'm wanting my brush to kind of skip across the texture of the paper just a little bit. So that's why I keep coming up to my sponge before I go to the paper. I'm not wanting this fluid, I'm wanting small little marks.
Jessica, you mentioned you were using 300-pound paper today.
Yeah.
And it's a rather small painting. How do you consciously adjust how you paint when you go from 300 to 140 or back again?
Well, the two things that affect the two differences that affect me the most, the way I think and work, are the fact that 300 has more texture, and so I have to think a little bit more fluidly so that it will I can get smooth, clean, linear edges if I want a crisp edge, and it's not irregular following the bumps of the paper. Where with 140, I can be a little bit drier and get the same look. You have to float the paint across takes a little bit more water. And then the other is just the texture is going to make a very different look. So I won't get, if I want like some grasses with these really like a really clean, smooth blade of grass, like these grasses back here, these I'm not going to try and handle these in the same way I might on 140. On 140, which is what this is, I might come in with these, things like that. And I could mask that first, or I could just paint the negative space around it, whatever. I'm not going to do an approach like that on 300 usually, because it's going to look, of course, now it's going to go really nice. Often it will catch and you get something a little bit more rough. And I thought that this image I picked partly for that. There's nothing, the areas that have a smooth, fluid, sharper edge are large enough shapes that I felt comfortable handling them on the 300. It really does change the texture of how the trees look and how the grass is. And it's a little more textury than I necessarily like for my work. It's not bad. It's just I usually like the other better, but I knew this would be a lot easier to handle with traveling and making sure that you can see what I'm doing. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a slightly different look that honestly, probably no collector or viewer would notice unless I pointed it out. You guys might all notice because you're all painters and you look at such things because you're thinking about it that way. But I just handle those grasses differently. There's no like clean, beautiful individual blades. They're kind of just representing clumps. Was that both parts of the
Awesome.
question? Did I get that?
Yes.
And you come into things like textures, and there's so many different ways to imply a look. You can do it any way you like. I sometimes will get into things like this, and I shouldn't do this because this is a nice new brush. But if you have a little bit of a drier area, you can bang your brush around and get these nice, dry texture like that. So sometimes that can be really great for rocks because what gives the sense of texture is these teeny tiny little value changes. And if you're going to paint every last one, you could be here all day long for one rock. I don't do that. Even if people think I do, I don't. I imply texture with things like that. I don't really want to ruin my brush, so I'm doing it in a little bit slower way. And a way that's going to have maybe, well, I don't know, let's still imply a texture. Texture is really just value shapes, right? Lights and darks and the shape that they're making relative to each other. Another. I do not like how these blue shapes, they got a little bit outlined anyways. I don't love them, but I'm not going to fix anything with them yet because I think part of what I might not love is the fact that everything else is not yet finished. And so they're standing out to me as something that looks problematic. And I've learned that sometimes it's worth waiting to fix certain things until you get a little further along because you might change your mind about either how to fix it or whether it needs fixing in the first place. It's so much of a painting. You start with a piece of white paper. Hopefully you've kind of planned it out and know where you're going, but until you get like 70–80% of the way finished, it doesn't necessarily even look like you're getting anywhere or doing anything attractive, and it just is awkward and unattractive. I mean, it depends on what you're painting and how you paint, but for me, there's this big phase that I think of as kind of the adolescent stage where everything is awkward and not the most attractive. It has promise and it can grow into something pretty good. But you have to get through that phase without doing anything too drastic as far as changes to your plan goes, because it might still work out just fine if you give it some time. Like most adolescents. Need a little time to grow into themselves. And some of this is just a little bit too light. A little darker right as it comes up to the edge. The skill that's helped me the most for the way I like to work, and I think is helpful for anybody, no matter what style you like to work in, is honing your observation skills. Your ability to see what you're actually looking at, not what you think you're looking at. And so much for most of us, and unless you were really fortunate as a child or young adult to get some strong influence from somebody, whether or not they were an artist, from somebody who taught you to really consider and look at things without taking your first impression. So much of how we see is just cultural and based on functionality in the world. And we've got all this stuff we know about things, and it makes it harder. So like water is reflective. You can see through it and it's reflective. And so that's hard. It's just shapes. It's shapes that have a value and have a color. And if you can identify what the shape is, what its value is, and at least kind of close what its color is, you're good. You just need to replicate that, which again can be time consuming and tedious depending on the subject, the complexity of those shapes, the complexity of any value or color changes. But that's doable. Anyone can learn how to do that. It's just a retraining how you observe and think about or notice what you're looking at. And the hugest thing I think you could do for any of us can do for ourselves is to get better at our observation skills and really understanding what we're looking at and separating, catching ourselves when we're starting to make assumptions about what things look like. And there's lots of different tricks you can use if that's something that you struggle with. One is paint upside down. You know, you've probably seen this before, you know, undoubtedly. It can be a lot easier looking at a subject upside down makes it feel different. It can be a lot easier to see the shapes. Oh, these are linear. You know, all the darker values through the water back here are very linear. Some have a little bit of angle, but mostly it's linear. So if I'm looking to simplify the sense of that, I'm going to keep my brush strokes going linear and horizontally to match the texture that I'm seeing here. Do I need to mimic every last rock as it is? No, really don't. But the perspective where those lines compress as they're further away, spread out as they get closer, that's important for a sense of what this is. But you don't need to know that. If you're just looking at what you're going to draw or paint, you don't need to know anything about any of it. You just need to be able to identify a shape, a value, and a color. And that's it. You don't need to understand how water works or how trees work or what the shapes you get in trees are or what colors things are made of. You just need to be able to look at something, take a pencil, outline a shape, conceive of that shape, and repeat it over in your painting. If you can do that, you can also then make decisions about, do you actually want all of those shapes? Or can you imagine a way to combine some of those shapes or have fewer shapes or hint at those shapes? There's, you know, a whole range of ways you can handle the things that you see. But if you can't identify what you're looking at as it is in the first place, I mean, it's so hard, and your chance of getting something that looks like you're wanting it to look is just lower because you're struggling to identify what you're even trying to do in the first place. Where if you can identify what you're going for, what you're after, you have a much better chance of getting there. Just like, you know, if you take a road trip, it really helps to have some maps and know where the highways exist and know whether they run north, south, east, west, and which direction you're trying to go. If you can identify that in your subject, again, whether it's a photograph or from life, it can be portraits, it can be animals, it can be flowers, it can be landscapes, anything. It's all just shapes. Nothing is inherently harder than anything else. Just some of it is a lot more tedious, and some of it we have to counter a lot of pre-existing knowledge to get at what we're really looking at instead of what we think we know about it. And that is so subconscious. It's tough to fight. It's an ongoing practice, but it's so helpful. So I'm just kind of trying to get some more texture. Apparently I switched again and I'm working on the light parts of the rocks. I didn't even notice I changed. And sometimes I do that. Sometimes I'll work a painting kind of all around and just keep moving around and developing things as it sounds good. Sometimes, like I said, I'll just work top to bottom and finish whole areas, or, you know, 90% finish whole areas as I go. Depends on my mood, my confidence, where I'm at. Who knows? Oh, and there's a dark value there I missed. Shadow shape. And there's a point where it really doesn't matter exactly what the textures in these rocks are. I could do, you know, like my splotching, I don't have a term for that technique, jabbing the brush into the paint and paper. I could do that across all these rocks. They all kind of have a texture sort of like that. But I want to look at, again, what's that texture doing? Do those value shapes, those tiny little value shapes, are they linear? Are they horizontal? Are they vertical? Are they angled? Are they rounded? Are they more square? Are they triangular? Like, just what is the style of shape that's happening so that whatever I'm doing with my brush mimics that. And also being careful to avoid the temptation, subconscious temptation, to generate patterns, because we're just so good at making patterns. And most of the time, you really don't see those in nature. You don't see them in people's faces or animals or flowers. If you do abstract work, you might love doing things with patterns, and it might be fantastic. If I'm doing rocks, I don't want them all have the exact same kind of texture, because that's not how rocks usually work in nature. There's usually some variation between them. And that's where I'll take a cue. If I weren't worried about each individual rock, I would at least take a cue from the reference I'm looking at about how much variability there is, and kind of, how much do I need to worry about changing things on different rocks, and how much is it the same. And I'm missing some darker values right in here too. Oh, that was not the color I meant. No, it's the color that's there now. And I want some of that to be bluer. A little more fluid. What's that? Oh, some of that is a lot bluer. And I don't worry if I miss something or get a shape wrong. I try not to worry too much about it, because the reality is that, a slightly different day, if the rocks have shifted a little, this is going to look different anyways. So if something goes a little bit wrong, I can look at a surrounding area and just say, okay, what at least would look believable here? And try to do something that's similar to the sense of what's happening in other areas. Oh, that's not quite right. Close enough.
Well,
And on my own, I wouldn't necessarily be this exacting to what I see, but since you're all watching, I'm kind of really following what I see, so you can see how I'm observing a thing and trying to replicate it. Was there a question? Comment?
I don't think so. I think someone maybe was just not muted.
Oh, okay. And now some of these rocks have a little more value variation than I've got so far. And I'm thinking about color too. Does it, are those areas a little bit more blue or warm or cool or something? And there's kind of a whole mix of stuff. So I'm just gonna, again, make a few options, and I might switch between them as I go. This is kind of a weird, yucky greenish, but I feel like I see this in a few places. So I'm just going to, I just want more variation, because each of these rocks is a little bit more unique in its color to its neighbors. It's very subtle, but they'll end up slightly different. So I just want a little more of that variability. And I'm not even worried about which rocks are which color or which anything at this point. I could be, but I'm close enough. My drawing is really quite accurate, and my main value structure is there. So now I'm just getting into the nuances that, like this already conveys a sense of what the place is. I just really like going even further with the development. It's fun for me. It makes me happy. So, we can go as far as we want to with this. I could also have handled this, very, very differently and been done a very long time ago. But I like the time. I like, I paint places that I love. I'm lucky enough that I get to do that. And so I try to really enjoy the experience of sitting with the place again. And thinking about the smells and the feel or experience that I had or anything. Now here's a place where the 300 pound is really nice. I have a pretty dry brush, and with my brush on the side, I can kind of skip across the texture and get a nice, dapply effect with that value. It might not exactly match what I'm looking at in my image, but as long as it's true to the sense of the overall sense of these shapes, I'm happy. That's close enough, because I have enough of the rest of the structure there that it's going to feel right to me based on how I like to work. I don't know, I think I kind of changed this rock already anyways, so And then something that else that I end up doing very easily for me is I get pulled into the details. I'm really observing and looking at all the things, and I can switch gears in my head to where I'm looking at the nuances of texture, and I lose my place when I'm thinking about the overall value structure. And so it's not uncommon for me to do a painting or do a section and get the texture really lovely and then step back and say, oh my gosh, that's all too light, or some area is too light. And right now what I'm seeing is these rocks all feel kind of too bright and too high contrast. They're really, really light next to the darks everywhere else. And I think my mediums and my darks are about where I want them, minus some of the texture, which will make it a little darker yet. Some of those rocks are going to need to get toned down a little bit. And it's kind of a purplish. There aren't really whites. Honestly, anywhere in here, even the reflections in the water are a little bit toned down. They're kind of a, oh, that's rocks. But the reflections too are a little toned down. So I'm going to take fluid instead of worrying about texture. I'm just going to take a very fluid puddle of a very light value. I'm going to start back here and just kind of in a quick application wipe that across these. Oh, and here's again where my 300-pound is going to be really nice because it's not an even, this is not laying down as just one smooth wash. So I'm still maintaining, actually building some texture in doing this. These will settle into the landscape a little bit better if they're not quite so high contrast. In this case, because they're not actually that high contrast. And I will often do this as a very last step because it gives me a chance to build the texture where I want it and handle those small value nuances and see where I'm at. And then I have real control of where my final values are going to end up because I'm just doing a wash on top to bring them darker. I hit the values I want a lot more easily than I used to. I used to end up with kind of everything would feel a little bit too light, and I'd end up kind of wanting to go through everything and darken it a bit. And if you use a light hand, if you aim to do layers of wash that are fairly fluid, but you don't wipe your brush through it a lot, you can really do a lot of layers and still have a very fresh, clean look. Where things start to go a little sideways is when you wipe a lot, because then you're pushing and moving those settled pigments, and some of them might lift, edges might soften, and you might end up with a look that was not at all what you were after. But if you just do a quick light, kind of floating of a wash on top, it won't disturb too much what's underneath. Now, sometimes you might want to disturb what's underneath. I will sometimes overdo the texture and contrast of a shape and then come in and really kind of a little bit agitate the surface with my wash because it makes a look that I like. But there's also lots of painters that don't ever do that, and they work in very few and very clean wet washes, and that's really cool too. You can paint however you want to paint. I'm a fan of trying to help people end up with a wide variety of experiences with different approaches, because the more different ways you know how to handle this medium, the more options you have. When you look at a subject and go, oh, well, that's doing this interesting thing, how do I want to handle that? You might have 5 different ways you could handle that, and that's so much more fun than and so much easier to handle than if you only know one real approach and can't figure out how to handle that shape with your one comfortable approach. If you can get comfortable with a lot of different ways of working, then you have a lot of options. Okay, I'm a lot happier with that. At this point, most of this is probably good enough. I could use a little bit of texture on some of these rocks. So we'll just see what we have. Oh, it's almost 8. Okay, well, good. I'm glad it's almost where I want it because we're almost out of time.
You're doing perfectly.
I would love to have this finished for you.
Well, Jessica, if possible, when you do have time, maybe you could send us a photograph of the whole
Absolutely.
painting.
Yeah, and I can send my reference photograph too, if you would like.
that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And you all probably know this, hopefully. I'm not sure what the copyright laws in Canada are. Most countries, they're pretty similar. If you're using somebody else's reference image for painting, if it's just for you and you're not sharing it anyway, that's absolutely okay to do. You can find stuff online. You don't have to have permission for it. If it's just for you and no one else is going to see it, you don't need to be too worried about it. If you're going to post it online, you want to get permission from the person whose image it is, and it's best to give the person credit if they want it.
I
So
think
if-
we're pretty careful about that here.
Nice.
And so anything we learn in a class is sort of in the class. And certainly for our shows, we're very quite strict about guaranteeing that anything
Yeah.
we put into shows is from our own reference material, even our own photos, if we use photo reference. Yeah, so no worries about that. It's
Some people
for
end up
you.
getting in trouble with that and they don't realize. So I like, if I can remember, I like to share that because you don't know what you don't know. And nobody really, hardly any of us really want to make someone else feel bad or, do the wrong thing. As far as I'm concerned, if I'm sharing an image with you, I'm happy to let you use it. If you do a painting off it, you're welcome to share it publicly. I just ask that you say, who owns the photo, because if I paint off the same photo and it goes to a gallery like this one is, or if it goes to a show, if it's online, some organizations do online searches for an image, and so I might get challenged with, well, that's not really your image. I see this other person that painted it too. But
I think if
if credit's
anybody
given, then it's all good because they can see that it was actually your image. And
If anybody here does that or intends to do that, say post it on their Facebook page, then we'd recommend that we'd say, this is what I learned in a workshop with Jessica Bryant, and it is her image.
yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm very comfortable with that. Some people don't like even that. They don't want their stuff to show up anywhere, but I like sharing things with others. I like, I think part of the interesting things about life and being alive and, sharing our time on this earth with each other is what we can learn from each other and share and do and improve, and all of that is just fascinating. So I would rather be able to help other people figure things out, and it can be useful. You watch somebody do something, it can be useful to sit and try to do the same thing and figure out how it works. All right, I'm happier with that. We're getting pretty close. And if you need us to sign off, we sure can, but I'm happy to keep going a little bit if you all want to be on here with me.
Well, I think we're okay for a few minutes. If other people need to go, that's okay, but I'll hang in there until you're comfortable with where you stop.
And any more questions, any thoughts, anything that anybody wants, please feel free. You've got me.
If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat, or maybe at this point you could just unmute and ask it.
Yeah. I'm just going to take a clean water and soften some of what I just did. And sometimes if things are a little bit like a fuzzier shape underwater, which these are pretty crisp and clear, but if it's fuzzier, I might even just take a wash of water just to soften all of the edges just a little bit. And sometimes that's enough to just settle things a little further back. And I said, I don't really like how those blues turned out. So I'm thinking, actually, maybe I'll try what happens with, I don't know that I like that any better, but I'm doing it. It's not too bad.
I saw a painting of yours in your on your website, and
Yeah.
boy, all the little brown pebbles underwater. That was something. I mean, you sure know how to do rocks and pebbles and water.
Well, it's a shape with a value and a color, and I don't know. Somehow I managed that this never felt or never hit me as being a hard subject, and I love water, and so I've ended up kind of starting to get pegged as the person who does rocks and water. I like everything, and I paint lots of everything, but now I'm painting stuff close to home a lot, and there's a lot of rocks underwater close to home. So here I am. And it never, I guess, I don't know, maybe maybe something my dad said when I was a kid, or just the way we looked at things and thought about things. It never really hit me to think of that as hard. I remember once thinking about, ripples on water and like what's happening. And I remember sitting, I think I put water in like the kitchen sink and was looking at like as you drop water droplets in, like what is happening and why does it look the way it looks when you look at like paintings or pictures of ripples or the photos that, capture one moment and you can see everything happening in that ripple.
Jessica, here's an interesting question. How do you take a good photo of your painting to submit to the shows that capture the colors well, or do you scan it?
Both. So I'm really lucky that about 30 minutes from me is a professional printmaker who does fine art prints, among other things. And he's really good at color matching and he really humors me in my perfectionism. And I've been with him for like 15 years and we will spend, half a day or a full day getting the color right on something. Super grateful to have him. Hopefully I get to have him for a nice long time. Um, so I have him scan some things, not as much as I used to because it's an expense and it takes time. So at home or at my studio, I have a couple of, I think they're meant for photography, a couple of lights on tripod stands, and they're like maybe this big LED flat face lights. They weren't very expensive. And I have a table against a wall where I lean my painting when it's still, usually I stretch my paper. So I have my painting up against the wall facing me, and I have those two tripods with the lights on either side so it's even light. And I've kind of figured out the strength of the light it needs to be because they're adjustable, so you can get the temperature and how strong of light it is controlled. And so I've kind of found a setting with a lot of trial and error that works. If it's too bright, it kind of blows out all the whites and things look value structure looks wrong. And if it's too dark, it's kind of the opposite problem. And then I have a nice camera mounted on a tripod in between the light tripods. And I aim for 50 millimeters for the lens, where the lens setting is at, because a photography friend once told me, and hopefully it's true because that's what I use, that's the closest to real life how your eye perceives. So you usually have less warping on a lens if you're at 50 millimeters. I don't know. I'm not a professional photographer, so I do that because it sounds good. And then I have learned the setting that I need on my camera. I shoot on manual with a time lapse, a time exposure, not time exposure, I'm sorry, a time delay. So I can press the button, back away, and everything stops wobbling. And I'll get at least 3 different exposures because sometimes something will look not how I expect it once I'm actually looking at them on my screen. And then I pull them up on my laptop and compare side by side and make basic color adjustments, value adjustments using the levels. I use a program that's open source. It's like Photoshop, not quite the same, but very similar functionality. It's called GIMP. It's free, open source. My husband's a software engineer, so I've gotten stuck in having to use everything open source, which sometimes is really problematic. One of these years I might pony up for Photoshop and actually learn how to use it, but I don't even know how to use it, so it doesn't really matter that I don't have it. But Photoshop, something like that, some kind of photo editor. And then you can make slight adjustments to color to get things to feel as close to the original as you can get them, which is tough because you never know. If someone's printing a catalog, you don't know for sure, what their paper is going to be or anything else.
Right.
So you can get an image that looks great on your screen and looks terrible printed on somebody else. One catalog will look terrible, the next catalog will look great. So it's always a little frustrating. I've kind of gotten past that because it's just reality. But I used to really struggle with that, thinking I was doing things wrong, and you just only have so much control. Mostly I try to make sure the value range looks accurate. And the overall warm versus cool, that looks pretty accurate. I'm just dropping some extra color in some of these dark shadow areas because it was a little on the cool side. So I'm dropping some browns and reds in just to warm it up and give it some very subtle value variation and texture. Gosh, You know, as I was painting these, I said you gotta be really careful so you don't get hard outlines, and look at those really nice dark outlines I have on those shapes, brother. So I'm gonna fix that. Because honestly, it might not be the color that I dislike, it might just be those shapes. So I need to make sure that I don't touch the dark outline and I paint just inside of it. Fluid enough that I can control it and make it even, but not so fluid that it wants to spread out and overlap those areas. Oh, I don't like that. That's too dark. Okay, this is going to be fun because that was a lifting pigment, this blue. So if I change too many things, it's going to look really unattractive really quickly. So I'm using a clean and dry brush because it's a very lifting color, and I'm just massaging those edges where it's too dark, hoping to spread that pigment to the sides a little bit. And hopefully it'll be enough to make me not hate it. Careful, it'll just soften that, but not necessarily bleed out. The trick is to stop yourself before you've overworked it. Let it dry, and you can come back in and do it some more. And not go into the center of the shape. So I'm really, when I'm doing something like this, I'm really watchful of what the pigment is doing. When I'm in lifting pigment, if it, as it starts to move and shift, you can see the look of it changing. And that's usually when you want to stop and get your brush out of there. Let it dry, you can come back and try again. It is tough to stop yourself sometimes because it still doesn't look right and you want to keep going. But I am 95% of the time now finally past the place where I keep going back into it when I know better. But it's taken me 17 years to get to the point where I can say that I manage it at least 95% of the time. Okay, that's a lot better. I think it was the outline that was bothering me. And sometimes it's hard to pinpoint what it is that you don't like. So you try something, if that makes it better, great. If it doesn't make it better, stop and reassess. And this is where I might pull into paper towel because I might want to pull all of the water out of that brush. And as I'm picking up pigment, I'm taking it off. You can see I'm getting a fair amount of pigment lifting. But I don't want any water in this really because I don't want to spread. I want this to still look like a clean application, even though it's not so much because I'm having to shift that edge. It's the bonus of your brain being distracted when you're doing a demonstration. You get to show some of the other things. Darker. And there's a point of diminishing returns on a painting where you could spend a lot more time, but it's not really going to get any better. And so if you really want, you got to make yourself happy. So if you really just need to keep working something because you don't like how it is, fine. But when you're not sure what else to do, or you start thinking, oh, it's maybe getting close, stop, let it sit for a while, come back to it later, try to put it someplace where you'll run across it unexpectedly out of the corner of your eye or something as you're walking down a hallway, or in a different room than you usually have it, and just ignore it and then come back to it. And if something really grabs you, or if the thing you were annoyed by before still bothers you, okay, fine. But if you're not sure it's going to make it better, make the painting a better painting versus just deal with something that's bothering you, really think about it twice or 3 times before doing it. That can be a big help. Because really one person's finished painting is another person's half done painting. And I mean, for real, there's a lot of stuff I paint where it would be just fine, but what I want it to do and be means I'm going to spend another 10 hours or 20 hours or something. Doesn't mean that it has to be like that. That's just how I want to paint it. And that gets to be different for all of us.
Jessica, one of the people watching wanted to know if you have a favorite place that you have painted.
Oh, you know, these rivers close to where I live are really kind of up there. They're loved by locals. They're not necessarily known by everybody else, and plenty of people don't really go there. So you really can get kind of this sense of personal discovery scenes. I mean, other people have been there, obviously. Other people have been everywhere. There's really not much left that people haven't seen or explored or been to sometime in the last 10,000 years. And that actually, to me, that's really cool. I like places like this. Like this river has been fished. This is a spot people love fishing. You know, it's a spot people have been fishing for thousands of years. It's not just, you know, the Europeans who came over weren't the ones who just discovered this and everybody else had just never found it. People are explorers. They're curious. You know, some people can't help wanting to climb every peak around. That's not new. So you can go to places like this, and to me it's kind of cool because you can sit there and think about like the reality that probably many thousands of people have been in the same spot and watched this river and seen it different times a year with, you know, higher flow, lower flow, the rocks, and through human history it's probably looked largely like this. And you know, we share this experience across time. That's kind of cool. You don't always have to be discovering something new. We can also just be, you know, sharing love of the things that have long been known and loved. So I'm kind of just making sure that I've handled everything similarly, that I haven't just sat in one area and gotten into more detail. I want to make sure that I've, you know, a similar level of finish, similar level of detail and value range. And again, I'm looking for places where maybe the values don't quite match. This is a lot lighter than it needs to be. Through there. So the rock is kind of through there. You know, even if you have a, like this edge of this rock, I just darkened part of it because the whole thing was kind of the same light value. And that's not really, one, that's not how my image looks, so that's not really what it looks like. But also I know that that's not realistic in most places. You're gonna have variations, and you know, the curve of the shape is gonna reflect light differently. So it's not gonna be one linear exact, sometimes, I suppose, but most often not. You won't have just a harsh outline of highlight on the top of a rock shape. That's pretty unusual. And I have some spots back here where my paper is showing through that aren't really supposed to be that light. So I'm gonna grab some yellows and get close to where I was at here just gonna wash, actually it can be even fairly light. I just wanna wash, oh, that's not the color I want. Too long. I just wanna float a little pigment so that the whites disappear. So a little water and pigment. And those should then feel like they settle into the rocks a little bit more. Right now, they kind of feel like they're these odd, uncomfortable shapes sticking out and not back in space with the rocks. Those whites read as bright highlights, which, you know, that high contrast tends to pull things forward. As things get further away from us, they tend to get grayer, or more the eye blends together those value variations, so you don't see as much small high contrast shapes. So I think that helped. And it's a little bit too dark now. Probably could have done that with just water, but that's all right, because what I could do is just take the same thing, Do some little bits. It might not be too dark. It might just be that this area is still a little bit too light compared to what I brought in there. So I could just do a little of the same thing through here. And maybe I probably could have done this. This would have been a good idea anyways, because I have a lot of texture. I was getting some value variation here, but it has a lot of texture and these are pretty far away. So I think I just want to wipe some water. I'm just going to agitate a little bit so those shapes kind of soften out. And this kind of just blends into itself and settles a little bit further in the background. And there's a point where you can kind of also just set the reference aside and look at it as a painting. Look upside down maybe too, and just make sure that, you know, if any one thing really jumps out more than anything else, that might be something that needs to be addressed. If you have things that jump out, but they're in different areas across your painting, then they're kind of, those shapes and those contrasts are probably, or maybe hopefully, balancing each other out compositionally. But if like one thing really grabs you, so if I left this rock really high contrast, got too dark in the darks, too light in the lights, and just left it, it might suck all the view to that one spot, all the attention. And make the painting a little harder to get around. And that's just a little weaker compositional design. I might even, I kind of want to soften the look of my trees too. I think I'm pretty close to what the image looks like, but it's a little high contrast through here. I kind of like it. I'm not sure I love it. Here's what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
Well, you certainly got some beautiful comments here in the chat. People like, excellent. I was so glad I could join. Wonderful painting. Thank you very much. Great demo. Thank you for a fantastic presentation. Wonderful demo. Yeah, on and on and on. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.
Amazing demo and painting.
So right now I'm just wiping some water. I want to keep my exaggeration right here because that's where the light is, and I'm just wiping some water to soften the rest of this and settle it further in the background. That's probably the last thing I'm going to do here. And we can sign off. If I tweak anything else, I'll get that done before I send a photo. But do you see how that just kind of softened that area? Maybe you can see that, maybe not.
We can, yeah.
Okay. I'm happier with that because it's interesting, but now it's not fighting with this as much. So I can, maybe I'm going to start here because this is really interesting, but as I pull back in here, that is too, but it's not all a fight at the same level of detail and contrast. Soften some of that too. That's just water. This is part of why I love watercolors. You can do things like that. You can't do that with oil or acrylic or pastel or much of anything else. Not the same way. It's a great medium. Well, thank you all for taking time to come and sit with me and watch.
Oh, thank you so much. And you really made this come alive from when we started it, you know, almost 2 hours ago. But in your caliber of painting, it's so interesting that even someone who paints like you do has your insecurities and your self-criticism.
And that's why I talk about it, is because, yeah, I always felt like everybody else just has it. And then there's weird me over here in this corner. And, you know, as I've gotten to know more artists, it's not actually that rare. A lot of us feel like this.
True.
And it doesn't matter where your ability is, you're still looking at what you could be, what you could know, how good you could be. And so if it doesn't matter where your skills are, we're all where we are when we're there. And some of us are racked with insecurities and whatever.
Well, it's great how you say how it's important to paint the art that makes you happy, and how you say you feel so lucky to be able to paint the places that you love, and that's what it's all about.
I think so too. It's hard to recognize that and be comfortable with it. At least for me, that's been hard. Something weird happened there. I'm not sure what it was, but I'm a little worried about what it's going to look like when it dries. So
the composition of this painting is just stupendous to me. It just draws you right into just perfect. Well, and you must have got down quite low in the rocks.
Yes.
That's where I love to sit by a river. So that's where I love to paint, because that, I don't know, just listening to the water, watching the fish jump or whatever they're doing is just fun. That connection. some of this is, okay, we probably need to sign off for all of you, but now I'm like, oh, that looks really kind of linear and stylized. I think I need to soften some of these edges just a little bit. Get a little more mid values happening through here. So not all the same.
Who knew how much more you can do when we started out? Wow.
I like to say, until the whole page is black, you could still do
Yeah.
that. And then you just start lifting techniques.
Yeah. Well, you can see how much you enjoy it too, which is great.
Yeah, it's just, painting is fun, and even when it's what you do for a living, sure, it comes with stressors and deadlines and different things, but not everybody gets to do something they just really love to do. So I try to make sure that I'm remembering and not
Yeah.
taking for granted that like I actually get to sit and do this instead of working
Yeah.
in a cubicle, which I've done that too.
Exactly.
It was fine. I've enjoyed the jobs I've had, but I like this a lot more.
Definitely. Well, I agree with Nancy. That's stupendous.
Yeah.
I don't know what the shape is supposed to be, but it looks weird. So I'm going to make something up. And maybe it doesn't fully need to make sense, but here we are. Just want to soften. Yeah, as long as it doesn't draw the eye, it doesn't really matter if it's exactly right. There's enough stuff to look at here.
Mm-hmm.
And if I did that much more over there, then I need these to not just all be lighter. So I'll come back over here, make sure I have some similar variation.
What size brush is that? An 8, 10? What?
This is an 8, and that's the other annoying thing besides pigment colors not being consistent is brush sizes are not consistent.
Mm-hmm.
So this one happens to be an 8. This is a newer find for me. This is a long round by Princeton, and longer length has a bigger body, so it holds more water. And I generally like to be in a little bit larger. This isn't a Skoda, but this happens to be a 12, whatever. The mid-size rounds that have a really nice point, just because the body holds so much more that you can keep working for longer. But these I actually like some of the smaller sizes pretty well.
It handles it so well. The color and the water and the points, the details.
Yeah, I'm terrible. I destroy brush. I get into I'll have a nice new brush, then I'll start doing something that's hard on a brush and intend to use an older brush, and I'll do that for a little while, and then I forget, and pretty soon I'm using the new brush and it's not so new. In theory, it would probably last a lot longer than it lasts me. That's too much. This I don't love. I got too much water in that. So I really lost the darker values. I'm glad it softened. I actually like that. Would not have anticipated liking that, but I do. So I'm going to just bring in some hints of where it was darker. So it's not just a overworked looking gray mass.
It's really three-dimensional.
That's that value range.
Yeah.
Yeah, the more you include more of those in between values, the more you get that tangible sense of volume with things. But you could convey this with like 3 or 5 values too, and be able to tell what the subject is. It would just have a very different feel. This is where I probably should just stop. I don't know that I'm making it better. I'm just getting a little nitpicky. It's too bright.
Trouble is you always see one more thing, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right. And that's where then you got to step back and does that thing still stand out when you step back? If so, okay, maybe deal with it. And if not, is it really going to make it any better, or is it just another thing to spend time on?
Is that 11 by 16 or 15 or what? Or it's not 11 by 20?
9.5 by 12.
Oh,
I don't, so one thing I like about being a watercolorist is you can cut your paper to any size.
yeah.
So unlike an oil or acrylic painter that wants to work on pre-stretched canvases, my compositional structure can be whatever best fits
True.
the subject, however I want to crop it. And so I really take advantage of that. And I'm all over the map with my sizes are almost never a standard size. Because almost never is something that makes the best composition going to happen to match a standard aspect ratio,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, makes framing require custom frames, which I would be doing anyway
Anyway.
for the places I'm showing work.
Right.
But that's certainly a consideration. It's a pain when I do plein air work because I'm so used to being able to do whatever I want. I hate having to work to pre-made sizes, but if you're doing like a competition and you have to frame the stuff at the end, who knows what scene you're gonna have? How are you supposed to predict which frame sizes to bring? So then you're kind of stuck with choosing a size and then forcing a composition to match.
Yeah.
It's doable, but not my preference.
I see we're coming up for 9:30, so I think we should probably
Sounds
come
good.
to a close.
And I think I'm probably gonna sign this and call it done. So I will get you an
Wonderful.
image
Fantastic.
and the reference image tonight or tomorrow morning. And that's Jody I'm sending that to, right? 'Cause
Yes.
That'd be
Yes.
great.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. I
Very
took
good.
copious notes and you have so many quotable quotes.
Oh boy, okay.
Because we're going to do I'll do a little review for our newsletter in the fall. I'll send you a
Oh,
copy.
okay. Oh,
But,
cool, thanks.
Boy, I've got lots felt like I was in school again. I've got lots of notes. You can talk and paint at the same time. A lot of people can't do that.
Well, to varied success. There's plenty of stuff that didn't go the way I would have preferred to paint in the first place, but I'm okay with not looking like I'm perfect all the time.
It was great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah,
fabulous.
thank you all.
Yeah, we enjoyed it. It was lots of fun. It went quick.
Yeah, it did.
Thank
Painting,
you.
time always flies when you're painting.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Have a good night. Thanks so much. We'll
Night.
be in touch.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
everybody.
Okay.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Jessica.
Thanks, Nancy.
Welcome. Bye-bye.
No
Okay,
problem.
bye-bye. Okay, good night, Nancy. Night, everybody.
Good night. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
just going to stop recording here.
Okay.